All right, so we'll just go over a little briefly about things I noticed in the project. You guys are welcome to chime in too, things that you liked or didn't like, or you found confusing, or you found a really cool way of doing something. Feel free to share that too. So a couple things. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. Okay, so I kind of did a quick little. Oops, where'd my window go? Oh, I grabbed it out. Okay. So I have I made a little visualization, a little word cloud. I don't know if you guys are familiar with word clouds. Word clouds are fun. I'm trying to see what version this is right here. Okay, cool. So I basically took all the stuff, the responses I got from you guys, or I gave feedback to you. So I think everyone who's turned in their project at this point should have gotten their feedback in an email. If you haven't, let me know. You should have gotten a link to filled out rubric, which will have even more detail and stuff like that. So again, if you're missing that, definitely let me know and I can get that out to you. But I think everyone at this point who's turned in their project through Learn will have this stuff. So basically what I did, I basically took all the stuff I had from the different overviews or the blog project or the technical part and whatnot, and just put it together. So I think this one right here, if I'm looking at this right, this is basically all the different parts I used in the blog post, so all the little feedback I had. So note a big part right here, basically the size of the word, if you're not familiar with word clouds, is just basically how many times it showed up. So you can see here technical showed up quite a lot, and also good job. So you guys all did a very overall great job. So one thing I would say is that in the blog post is the technical piece, like you should really think about your blog posts as focusing on some technical aspect. And your goal really for your blog post is basically to show off as like, hey, look, I know what I'm doing. Look at all the technical stuff I do. So you're really writing for other data scientists or other people who are looking to get into data science. So things that you can include are like code snippets. So you can see here, that's a big word going on here. Putting in code snippets. So like kind of like little blocks of code. It doesn't have to be the whole like sheet of code. Like I'm thinking like, maybe a couple lines at most, maybe like 5 lines if it's something succinct that you want to talk about. Definitely use visuals. So like putting in there that, like showing like a visualization or, even if it's just like a picture to emphasize your point. Again, it's kind of like it's almost like a presentation, but in the written form. And obviously, if you don't have much experience with writing, this might be completely new to you. Some people might already have experience kind of doing these kind of things. That's a great thing. And you can always share your experience with each other. It definitely just trying to know your right flow and like how you like to explain things. But the main part you want to do is you want to show your technical knowledge. You want to say, hey, like this is one aspect of my project I want to talk about. And I think for the first blog post, I think everyone did a pretty good job. I think some things I did notice that happened was people tended to say as their project as a general thing, like this is how I did my project, which is great for the first blog post. But I think what ends up happening there is that it becomes a little too watered down because you have to cover all these things within less than 1,500 words. And so really what your goal should be is like, hey, let me just talk about, like, for example, if I found a few people who did this, found a new Python library that they use for either visualization or exploring or whatever, talk about that specific package. Like you could just say, hey, this is how I made a geographical plot. You can talk about those kind of things. You can talk about specifically about like, how you did EDA, or you can talk about if you really are really interested about the models, like, I was exploring these different models. These are the things that you have to consider when you're making linear regression. Like basically, I think just focus on one thing and just build on top of that. And one way I kind of build when I write stuff, I will literally just make an outline, and like I'll make the outline and then I'll start filling out the outline, and then eventually that becomes like my whole writing. I don't, everyone's different. I'm not someone who can just literally start writing and write succinctly. Like I'll just go in circles and circles. As you probably have noticed when I'm talking out loud, that's how I talk too. So like that's why I have to have that extra structure in there. But basically know that like the big thing about like writing, it's just going to be practice. Like just like presentations, it's just something you practice, and eventually the more you do it and the more often you do it, the better you'll be at communicating, in the written form. And also I like to say is like, I think sometimes people get a little nervous about sharing stuff online, being in the sense like, oh no, everyone's going to judge me and all these things. But I honestly think that by kind of essentially forcing yourself to like post it where it is a visual place. So I saw some people who posted on Medium, which is awesome. I think that's a great way to kind of put there. And I think it kind of forces you to be like, all right, I put myself out there, and it kind of becomes easier and easier every time you do it. And I think that's like in the best way, because in the end, you're posting and stuff like that. You're trying to show other people and potentially future employers that, hey, I know what I'm talking about. And like, hey, you should talk to me about this and everything. Like you want to basically entice people. That's essentially what your ulterior motive is when you're doing these blog posts. Okay. But anyway, I thought overall, good job. Okay. Anything you guys have a question on?
Is there any easy way to see the other blogs that other people have done on Learn? See some best practices?
Yes. So there
see what the rest of us have done.
Yeah. So for first thing, like for you guys, feel free to like, start a thread if you guys want to. Someone wants to start that on Slack. It's like, hey, here's my blog post, check it out, and feel free to like, help each other out. Obviously, I'm not really worried about you guys being like, friendly and stuff like that. I think all of you guys are really good at actually giving constructive criticism in a good way. But definitely share it out with each other. And that's true for even like the project in general, GitHub and your repos and everything. If you want to check out some more like LearnCo, there's the LearnCo magazine here. Okay, and so there's actually a few articles. Note that these are not all data science.
That's what I was going to say. Is there any way to filter them for data science? Because there's a lot of just...
Yeah, there's a lot, because a lot of the software engineering part. And I got to be honest, I don't know how you can filter exactly. I could try. I think this is the wrong one, but let's see. I think this will search. Oops. It helps if I spell it right too, right?
Maybe a space between.
Yeah, I think this searches. Okay, this actually searches the. That's what I thought. This searches the curriculum itself.
Right.
So yeah, if I find a way, maybe I'll talk to the the tech team to see if either they have implemented this already, or maybe it's something they can't implement. But as of right,
maybe that's our web scraping project.
There you go. you can scrape LearnCo right here. Oh, I clicked the wrong thing. Yeah, I'm trying to see if there's a tag now. I don't think you could tag anything on here. So anyway, that's something. At least you can see like the idea too. It doesn't necessarily have to be data science.
Right.
Oh, here's one. That's right.
I mean, my blog was everything that you just said. It was too long and covering everything.
Yeah, and so like for example, like this obviously, I'm not trying to like bash on Katie here, but I would say like having a lot of wall of text. I think like let's be honest, like if you see a text like this, my first instinct is like, I don't want to read this. Like it just seems like a lot of work. And to be honest, it's like that's what you're kind of doing. When you're writing this stuff, you're really trying to say, hey, look at my stuff. So usually breaking it up into paragraphs, breaking it up with like different like visual pictures and stuff like that. Again, there's definitely a few of you guys who really maybe have to feel already that would be.
I found I couldn't add any images to this.
I've heard that too with Learn.
You had to reference them through, like it had to be something on the web.
I'm trying to see if there's a good one.
And then it changed your format. So like in fairness to the one we just looked at, removed all the spacing between lines. So you had to go back in and...
Yeah, it might be because it's a pre-thing. To be quite honest, I haven't actually like looked at how to post on this blog. So maybe that's something I need to look a little bit closer at and see how this works. Because you're not the only one, Andrew, too. I think a few people said the same thing where they had difficulty trying to getting it to work. See, I know that you can put different images and such in here. So like these are like code snippets here. I'll have to check.
Yeah, they did something.
Yeah, so I'll have to check exactly how this works. But I'll get back to you guys on that too, because that was some feedback I heard. But I would actually, that's like, it was conflict of interest now, because like I, working at Flatiron, it's like, oh, you use a Learn blog platform. I would strongly actually suggest using an outside platform. Medium.com is a great platform.
But you did yours on Medium, right? How was that process? Did you have to sign up for a membership or anything? Or?
It should be free.
Oh, yeah.
Is that right, Bardo?
Sorry. Yeah. No. It's you sign up. Actually, I there is a subscription you can take, but that's only for when you're reading more than 3 articles a day. That allows you reading more than 3 blog posts a day. And I think that's like $50 a year or something like that. But just for writing your post, you don't need to pay anything. You just I think you can sign up with your Facebook account or whatever, and you can start using it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a few of you too. Bardo, Giovanna, Nicole, Ali. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anyone else from our cohort, specifically from Medium. But yeah, like I think all of you guys wrote on Medium, and I think your experience was pretty good writing on Medium, like easy to like navigate and do it. So okay, cool. Yeah, so worth
I
checking
think
out.
the good thing about Medium is that it just gives you the not lots of options in terms of formatting and so on, but that's good as well because so you have like a couple of types of headings you can use, and but at the end that's more than enough, and I think the result is like quite nice. I mean, like definitely nicer than other like options, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've used other publishing tools before, like Squarespace, WordPress, and I found Medium the easiest one to use for publishing. Really, you can even like search on a search bar for high quality images to add to your post, and the formatting is really extremely user friendly. It's very easy to use. I would recommend it.
Awesome. Yeah. And one thing I would say too, besides just the fact of publishing on there, is that I go on Medium myself constantly, and there's some really great technical articles. So I know a lot of data scientists will go onto there, and that if you post on Medium, is that you essentially are in that good company too. So something can there, especially if you're thinking about building like your online presence essentially.
If we are going to post something on there, can we run it past you first?
Yeah, of course, definitely.
Something wrong.
No, of course. You're welcome to share it with me. You're welcome to share. I mean, obviously, you guys are welcome to share it with each other too. Again, I'm only one person. I'm not perfect. I try to be. But yeah, you're welcome to share it with me first before posting. And that's true even like with your GitHub projects and stuff like that too. Like I wouldn't actually stress too much about saying, oh, do I need to make a commit? Like, can you check my thing before I commit? Just commit it and then send it over to me, if you want to, and say, hey, like I was wondering about this specific part. Does this look right? And I can take a look at it too. That's, again, I'm fine with that even in the middle of your project. You don't have to wait until the very end to share it with anyone. Cool. But anyway, blog post, I think you guys overall did a good job. I think for most people, this was their first blog post too. So I think there's always room for improvement, but I think overall, considering it's the first one too, you guys did a great job.
Yeah, that was interesting as well when you go in to learn and there's all these past due notes. Is that anything to worry? Because you're supposed to do a certain amount of blogs, I guess, in the course.
Oh, okay.
And this was my first one.
Oh, because it shows up on as past due, as you're saying, right?
Yeah. Is that anything to worry about, or?
No, technically. So the only things you do have to, for each project, you have to make a blog as well. But I think there's 2 other ones in addition to the project ones blog post. Those 2 can technically be done at any time.
Okay. Yeah, one was like why you want to be a data scientist or something.
Yeah. I would suggest doing that. I mean, your break's coming up, right? Great time to write your little blog post then.
This break's getting really busy, Victor.
You guys got time. It's a good vacation. No, but yeah, I mean, I'm just saying is that if you do write a paragraph, and then start from somewhere, versus like waiting until like, you're like, oh, look, you've got everything done. And then you're like, oh, shoot, I never wrote why I want to be a data scientist blog 10 months from now. So sooner than later is what I always say. But,
yeah, right.
And of course, you can always write a draft and come back to it. You don't have to post it through. But know that you don't have to do it right now, you know, as long as it's done by those two, at least the two additional ones from their project, those can be done at any time. Okay. All right. So I did want to show a couple more things. I have made a couple more word clouds for like the technical and the non-tech. So I'm just going to throw these onto here. Okay, there's the technical, and then I'm just going to put the non-tech here too. So first of all, for the non-technical part, I think I already said this before. You guys did a great job, I think, overall. I want to take more credit for it, but I really don't feel like I can. I think you guys, in general, have a pretty good eye on making your slides pretty good. Dara, when during the demo, she actually told me later on, she's like, these are some of the best presentations I've seen, especially for the first project. So you guys should feel very proud of yourself. One thing though, like as you can probably see, a big part, other than slide, which I probably should just not have kept that in there, but the next biggest one here is technical. One really big danger I think a lot of people ended up doing is they got a little too technical. And this is honestly completely normal, especially considering you all are in a data science program, you want to become data scientists, you enjoy the technical stuff probably, like you enjoy the stuff that you built, and you should enjoy that part. Just be aware of that, is that not everyone will share that immediate joy with your technical pieces. And that could be like, you know, showing like an OLS summary report for like the different, you know, regression line. It can be making a graph that looks really cool and like gives a lot of information. But for someone who's not familiar with that kind of, you know, just visualization, just might not understand it really well. These are things you always have to kind of consider. And one thing I think I've said this a few times already, but I'll repeat it again because it's worth it. Always consider, like when you're talking to a stakeholder who is not from data analyst background, data analytics or data science, something along those lines, if they're not in that background, assume they have like high school level math. And that's not to be like, just like, oh, like they're dumb or something like that. It's really just saying like, you know, you don't want to overwhelm someone with something that they try to have to like remember or figure out exactly what's going on. Simple graphs like, you know, bar charts. Everyone can look at a bar chart and know which one's taller. You can look at, you know, a line chart and say the general slope of going things through. People kind of generally understand, you know, as you increase, you're like, okay, like that's an increase. So line charts are really typical. Scatter plots, I would be careful about, especially if there's a lot of information, a lot of data points. And this is usually happens with data science. We have a lot of data points. We're to the point where like, it's kind of not super clear what's going on. One way you can do this is adjust the alpha, so only a few scatter plot points will actually be apparent. I'm guilty of this too, where I put a scatter plot in there and I realized afterwards, like, you know what, this is actually help the stakeholder understand what I'm doing. And that's really what it comes down to, is the reason why you don't want to go too technical is you don't want to overwhelm them with information. A couple other things I'm trying to think is, it's just overall, just be aware of your audience, right? So like, again, a non-technical audience, they don't really care if you had a p-value, like they don't care about you talking about all the different p-values and the specific coefficient numbers and stuff like that. They don't know what that means probably. And if they do, or if they do want to try to figure it out, they're going to try to really understand, like if they see like an OLS readout report, they're gonna be like, what's this? I just said R squared. Like, you know, they're going to look at all these numbers and they're not going to listen to you. And in the end of the day, it's not about, the presentation is not to give information. The slides are not what it's supposed to be about. In the end of the day, it's you who's getting the information, and you want them to pay attention to you. You're the important thing, not the slides. So one thing I kind of say is that if you ever see, like if you're doing a presentation and you ever see like, you know, you're talking about stuff and then all of a sudden you see everyone like write down and furiously trying to write down the information you wrote down, you probably have too much information on your slides, because now they're no longer listening to you. They're trying to get the information from the slides. And really what the slides should be doing, your presentation, should be emphasizing your points. Like you should be giving all the information out verbally, essentially. And those points on the slides just emphasize the main like thesis of like your little, like, you know, little like 30-second, maybe 1 minute portion of that presentation. So kind of speaking to that, I think I mentioned this a few times too. For example, there were like 3 recommendations. We said like, make sure you have at least 3 recommendations for your stakeholders. Put each recommendation on a separate slide. That way they're only looking at 1 recommendation at a time, and you can say, and you can go through them pretty quickly. You can go through like 20 seconds, you know, maybe even less than that through each slide. And you say, well, 20 seconds is really quickly. Well, if you don't have very much information, you could have maybe just a picture and literally like a phrase, like maybe like 3 words, then you're not going to worry about going through it too quickly because they're going to absorb that. But if you have 3 bullet points and you go through it quickly, then all of a sudden they're trying to get all this information because they don't know when you're going to change the slide. So just be super careful with all that stuff. Okay. Let's see here. And these are things I think like practice too. The more you do these kind of things, the more you kind of get the feel for it. And some people, to be quite honest, have a better skill just naturally in this than others. And honestly, it comes down to like a lot of practice and, just gaining confidence and knowing how to do it. I think it's something, I could be wrong, but I want to say I've heard this a few times, so it sounds true. It's that there's something like the #1 like fear in like the US, and it's something like presentations is like second right behind death, or might be right above death. So more people are scared of doing public presentations, public speaking, than like death. So like that kind of gives you a feel like, like if you're feeling like that, you're not alone. I definitely was like someone like that for a long time. And what basically broke me is that when I was a teenager, I had to do a lot of public presentations. Like I had to do like an hour-long presentations amongst like groups of like 150 people. And also teenagers, like sometimes. And I think basically what broke me is like, oh, I just kept doing that so many times over every summer for this group. And eventually it just became like, oh, this is just something I do now. And I think that's the best way. So I always recommend everyone who shared their presentation on demo, awesome, because I think the more you kind of get used to sharing it, it just becomes more natural and easier, and you find the things that work out well for you in the way you talk and the way you present things. And you guys are probably in probably the best environment, the safest environment. You guys are all learning the same stuff. You guys all are trying to learn from each other. You guys all been very supportive of each other, so I think you're kind of like in the best situation. So definitely take advantage of that. Cool. A couple things I did really like that I think a few people did is I think I mentioned to a few people, I call it visual grammar, is that there's some people who had like on their slides had a consistent visual grammar, which is awesome. So that means kind of like the same colored, like for example, you notice this a lot when someone uses the same color, not just on every slide, but also like in their visualization, like their visualization in their slides match the color. You can see there's like a thoughtfulness in the color selection, the way you present things. I hope I'm like, Nicole, I'm gonna call you out for this one because it was really great. Is that if you guys get a chance to look over Nicole's part, I really liked that the color for both the bar chart in her table that was next to each other matched each other. So I think, I don't know if, I can't remember the exact details, but it was something like, one was brown or orange and then the other part was blue, and that matched exactly on the table. And then it was great. He's like, that was the first visualization. And then the next visualization, which had a different kind of thing, it still had the same colors with those relationships. And doing visualizations like that, thoughtfulness is like that same visual grammar can really be helpful to an audience to basically say, oh, they can kind of see the similar stuff. So if you have like 4 different slides that all have the same kind of like visual grammar, people can catch on to it very quickly. And it makes you be able to, what's going on. Oh, did my internet go down? Okay, am I back? Okay, cool. I saw my little Wi-Fi thing pop up, so I was like, oh. So anyway, what I was just saying is that just being consistent with the visual grammar can be super helpful, because now you can go through many slides and they're no longer looking and saying, what does that visualization mean? They're like, oh yeah, it's the same one. And they're subconsciously at least picking that up and getting that information. So I thought that was really good. And I think a few of you guys already had that in place, but I wanted to take that specifically because honestly, Nicole, I don't think I could have done that, or at least I wouldn't have thought that. That was really cool. And again, I wish I could take more credit for it, because I think you guys have done some really awesome things that it's like, oh, I wish I taught you guys that, but I clearly didn't. So you guys should really be proud of yourself. Yeah, and so just general stuff, just making it clear for your technical audience or non-technical audience. And then you can always have more slides. Like I've had like 15 slides over like a 3-minute presentation. And for the most part, it wasn't rushed because basically each slide had like 3 words on it at most. So just know that you can do it, and you have to know your style too. If you feel rushed going through it, then you need to adjust, and see what works out. But the main idea is make it very quick where someone can look at it like for like less than like 5 seconds and know immediately what's in that slide. If they need to look at it and they need to stare at it and they need to write stuff down while they're instead of listening to you, then you have too much information or maybe getting too technical. All right, cool. Any questions or anything comments you guys wanted to mention about the non-tech presentation side? Cool, awesome. Awesome. All right. And again, I think you guys did really great. So the last part is the technical piece. And I think you guys all did pretty well. I think that this is a first big project where like you're basically doing a mini data science project, and I think it can be really intimidating. And I think you guys all did a great job exploring it. One thing, as you can see, the biggest word on here, explanation. Put down your explanations and mark down cells and such. Make it clear, like, because every time we did the little conversation for the technical piece, it was clear that you all knew all the information. You knew the data really well. You could explain your parts and everything, but it wasn't always clear. If I were to look at just the Jupyter notebook and not have you like guide me through it, it might not be super, like at least the way some were structured, or maybe parts of it weren't structured well in this way, is that it wasn't clear. It's like, well, how did you go from here to here? Like, well, what was the reasoning, or why did you drop this part? So just be super aware of that. And I'm not saying that you guys made it really like ambiguous. It's just that just be aware of putting the explanation there, especially if you have some new insight, some specific thing. Make sure you put that explanation in there. And it can be like, a sentence, or it can be, 2 paragraphs talking about this specific, part. Say, oh, I noticed these parts in this visualization or these visualizations. So I explored it more and I found out, maybe do something there. It's like, okay, like, oh, I found this right here, so I decided to drop it for these reasons. Like, that's all you really have to put down. But basically you're putting your thoughts on paper. That way people can understand it when you're not there. And this will also help you, it'll also kind of help you with your communication essentially. Is that, what's it called? Like, people can read your stuff and you'll say, oh, okay, like, you don't have to have someone literally explain it, and that can help get you, there's going to be less times where someone's going to say, well, you shouldn't do it that way, or argue with you because you explained it. Usually when you explain things, people tend to kind of just like say, oh, okay, they kind of accept that, like your decision. Because a lot of times in data science, there isn't a direct decision on what exactly you should do. So you have to do a lot of testing and tweaking and see what works best. Again, explanation, explain. You can see it come up quite a bit. I'm trying to think of anything else. Emphasize, yeah. Your decisions. So again, like, just say like what your decisions are. Just make sure to explain. All of these are basically just about explaining and communicating that part. That's probably the biggest part. I think everyone did a pretty good job. Oh, one thing I did notice, and I think the curriculum might kind of state this in the wrong way. It's probably why everyone kind of tends toward this. A log transformation, you do not need to have your data be normally distributed to do a linear regression. That's not actually a requirement for the linear assumptions. What is similar to that is your residuals after your linear regression line fit, those have to be normally distributed. And that's your heteroscedastic, homoscedastic, your residual plots, your QQ plots. That's the assumption on there. So I think a lot of people did a log transformation to try to, like, their reasoning was to make the data into a more normal distribution. You don't actually need to do that, like, to make it normal. However, by doing a log transformation, you do 2 things. You actually tend to make your data into more of a linear relationship. So like, if you tend to actually have much more like of a curve, like exponential, if you do a log transformation, that will actually even out your data to be more linear, which is what we need for a linear regression. It also tends to squeeze out your really, if you imagine like your points going out like in a cone, by doing a linear or a log transformation, it'll squeeze that cone down, which means your residuals will tend to be in a linear, will be more normally distributed. But the reasoning we do those log transformations is not because of the data distribution being normal, if that makes sense. It's just a side effect.
I'm curious what a non-normal data but with normal residuals would look like.
So let's see here. So for example, like let's say a very simple one like X and Y. Let's say target and price. So we have square footage. And let's say we have a bunch of houses that are very small, like 600 square feet, like really, really small, right? But they all fall on this line. And then you have an outlier that is like, I'm just making some crazy number out, like 10,000 square feet, okay? But the 10,000 square feet perfectly fall along the line of the smaller houses. It's not really an outlier in that sense. It's an outlier that it's from the data distribution. It's not normal in that sense, but you basically have it follow the linear regression line well. Another way you can explain it is like if you had clusters, like small, medium, and large houses, that data wouldn't be normally distributed, but it could still potentially fall on the line of the best fit. And that's why you don't technically need to have your data to be normally distributed.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
So then that makes it trickier to get rid of outliers, right? Because just because
Yes.
they're large doesn't mean that you don't want them. It's if they're large, but they're nowhere near the line of fit.
Yes, and that's where it can be kind of tough. And this is where, honestly, the definition of outlier is kind of fluid, exactly why you define it.
Mhm.
And a lot of times outliers, the reason why we get rid of those outliers that are far from that data distribution is not because it will affect our linear regression, but because maybe that point shouldn't really be part of the data. That should really be considered some other thing that's not like the rest of them. For example, if you saw an outlier that was actually part, like literally a like hotel building versus a house, like that will be a different outlier, but that outlier, the reason why it exists like that is because it is very different from the actual house itself. So, and that's why you should always investigate outliers and say, does it make sense for me to drop this? Or is it just a very extreme value of a proper kind? So
if we were doing this in the real world, there's, I can't remember exactly, but about 40 or 50 houses over 4 or 5 million. Would we want to focus our model on where there's more data and say our model's not robust enough for these super expensive mansions, or?
Yeah, and that's where you might decide, like say, those are outliers because really, in a way, those are a different kind of thing. Those are mansions compared to our houses. So we don't really have a huge amount of data to say, oh, can we actually determine if these are useful or not? So, and that might make sense to drop them. I would probably drop them in that case, unless, the specific data set we're trying to explore is really expensive houses and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And so maybe in that case, you might have more, like if you, especially
drop the low value ones. Yeah.
Especially like a cluster of data where it's like, oh, there's a whole bunch of expensive ones and then there's like nothing and then like really cheaper ones. That might suggest to you, like, okay, like I'm looking at two different kinds and maybe I need to analysis in that way. So a lot of this is like, you can hear it's a little subjective, to be honest. Like, I think people don't like hearing that, especially when you think of it analytical, but a lot of times it's just like, that is just the truth, is that the reason why we can do that kind of stuff is because the numbers themselves are not enough to guide you in your analysis. Like your numbers should suggest things and basically give you evidence for things, but in the end you have to decide on if it's worth you exploring. I think I said this, I always forget it. It's the quartet.
Oh, this is the 4 charts with the means the same, is it?
Is this the one? I'm trying to think. There is a data set quartet. I can't remember what it is. I can't remember off the top of my head. But there is a something quartet. And it's got, there it is. That's why I can't remember, because I can't pronounce it.
Yeah.
Hansicombs? I'm going to say that. Yeah, I'm going to say you're right, Andrew, because I don't know. But you can see here is that this data set, you can see these data sets are very, very different from each other, right? They're clearly describing different things. One is much more of a randomness. One is basically aligned with an outlier. You can see basically all the points are clustered around here except for one point over here. And this was not even a linear regression line. So looking at this visually, you can very quickly say, these are different data sets or describing different things. But what's interesting is basically a lot of the statistical points in here, the mean, the sample of variance, the mean of y, the correlation for these quartet are basically almost the same. And what happens is that if you only went off of the mean, the variance of x and y, the correlation even, the linear regression line, you can see those lines basically, those basically are saying is that linear regression line, this blue line, is saying I can describe these data sets with the same amount of accuracy essentially. And you can see it's like, well, that's clearly not true. And this is why you have to be really careful saying, the numbers themselves are essentially, the reason why I say like the numbers get to be careful is because you're summarizing data. The data really are data. Like the data is these points. It's not the line. It's not the sum. It's not the standard deviation. It's really those specific points. But when you have literally hundreds of thousands of points, you can't look at all the points and actually get anything meaningful. So we use statistics, which is essentially a summary of some sort that's describing some aspect. But in the end of the day, you have to be aware that it is a summary, which means you are losing some information in the way of the whole entire picture. In reality, those summaries are really important. They actually help guide us into understanding data. But this is where it's always really important to know what you're looking at, and does it, in a sense, does it make sense? Do the things I'm finding actually make sense? Kind of thing. Okay. Cool. All right. Any questions on that in general? I guess I'm running about just about my time right now. Cool. So I guess I forgot I'm recording, so I gotta stop recording then.